Hi there. Please let your mind slow down and go at ease, and let me know in the comments where you're from. Also, what's your best tip for a peaceful night's sleep and keeping a calm mind? Whether it's a relaxing bedtime ritual, a favorite book, or a mindfulness practice, your advice could be just what someone needs. In early December of 2019, I had an experience I'll never forget. I'd gone out to do some late-night shopping alone, a rare break as a 31-year-old mom of two. My husband was home with the kids, and it was around 8:30 p.m. when I pulled up to my usual Target. The parking lot was mostly empty, so I parked close to the store, next to a cart caddy. I made a mental note of the nearby cars, a habit I'd picked up over the years for peace of mind. I wouldn't call myself paranoid, but I'm careful. I'd attended a few seminars on personal safety, and I know the basics about spotting red flags. Nothing seemed unusual that night as I made my way through the aisles, browsing for some things for the house. It had only been 10 or 15 minutes when I noticed a man a few aisles over. He looked about mid-20s, wearing a dirty grey sweatsuit and brown work boots, and there was something off about him. I smiled politely, but he didn't respond. He looked right past me, his face blank, almost as if he was in some kind of daze. I brushed it off as he moved along, but a few minutes later, I noticed a second man dressed the same way. Grey sweats and work boots, no card, no basket, just wandering with his hands in his pockets. He looked at me too, just for a moment, before darting his eyes away. That's when I felt the hairs on my neck rise. A bit later, a third man caught my attention. He looked older, but he wore the same grey sweatsuit and boots. No card, no items, just walking with his hands in his pockets. I started to wonder if maybe they were part of a work crew, maybe construction guys on a break. But if that was the case, why were they moving separately, drifting from aisle to aisle? As I kept shopping, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching me, almost like they were tracking my every move. Every time I moved to a new section, within a few minutes, one of them would appear on a nearby aisle. The feeling of being watched became so intense that I decided to test it out. I started moving in a random pattern, jumping from aisle to aisle, backtracking, taking turns at random. But each time, one of them would pass by, barely acknowledging me, but making their presence known. It started to feel like a game, and I was the one being hunted. I gripped my card tightly, ready to use it as a barrier if I needed to. I'd been shopping for over an hour by then, but I was too uncomfortable to keep browsing, so I decided it was time to leave. As I made my way to the checkout, one of the men appeared behind me, walking faster. My heart started pounding. I stopped and turned to face him, locking eyes. He smirked, then brushed past me, never breaking eye contact. His stare was dark, almost mocking, and it sent a chill down my spine. I had lost track of the other two, but his presence alone was enough to make me feel deeply uneasy. I quickly checked out and approached the store manager, discreetly explaining what had been happening. She listened closely, her face falling as I described the men. She told me they'd been in the store before, and several female employees had felt uneasy around them. She offered to have someone walk me to my car, which I gratefully accepted. As we walked out, I felt a sense of dread rise. About 3 parking spots away from my car was a white, windowless van. 2 of the men were leaning against it, facing my car, while the third sat in the driver's seat. When they saw us, they quickly climbed in and sped out of the parking lot. I felt a wave of relief, but also a chill that settled deep into my bones. The next week, I heard there had been several abduction attempts in the area, all reported near that same shopping center. I have no doubt it was the same men. I made it home that night safe, and I'll always be grateful for that. But the memory of their blank stares, their careful stalking, it's a reminder I won't ever forget. When I was 20, about 6 years ago, I worked as a delivery girl for a popular pizzeria in my area. I initially worked the late morning to mid-afternoon shift, but when the night delivery driver got fired for losing his license due to a DUI, my boss shifted me to the night shift. He had hired a family friend who could only work during my regular hours, and I really didn't want this change. Late night deliveries always made me uneasy. You never know if someone who orders pizza at that hour has good intentions or not. Unfortunately, my boss insisted that I either take the night shift or be fired. Not wanting to lose my job, I reluctantly accepted. The first month went by without any problems until one night I had to deliver a pizza to a house that barely fell within our delivery radius. I punched the address into my GPS and headed to a suburban area. I arrived around 11 p.m. to find the block quiet but decently lit, mostly lined with modern townhouses. The house I was delivering to was a duplex. I rang the doorbell and waited about 30 seconds. No answer. I rang it again and waited another half minute, my nerves starting to get the best of me. Finally, a man opened the door. He looked to be in his late 40s, tall and skinny, maybe a little over 6 feet. I told him his pizza had arrived, and he just stood there, staring at me. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yeah, I'm fine. Sorry, I just got off work and zoned out a bit," he replied. Fair enough. He handed me the money, and as I counted out his change, he said, "You're really beautiful, you know that." Not thinking much of it, I thanked him for the compliment and handed him the change. After exchanging goodnights, I walked back to my car and finished my deliveries for the night. A few days later, I received another order to the same address. I headed over around the same time and rang the doorbell. He opened the door excitedly and said, "Hey, it's you again. How are you?" I told him I was tired and just wanted to go home. He chuckled and said, "I know that feeling." While he pulled out his wallet, he asked for my name. Feeling a bit tired and not thinking straight, I stupidly told him. Then he asked if he could have my number, claiming he'd love to hang out with someone as gorgeous as I was. Whoa, buddy, pump the brakes. I had only delivered pizza to this guy a couple of times. I had no idea who he was, and I was concerned he thought I looked much younger than I actually was. Awkwardly, I mumbled, "Sorry, I have a boyfriend." He got upset, saying, "Oh, okay, I see." We stood there in silence before I wished him a good night and headed back to my car. He stayed at the doorway, staring at me until he finally went back inside. Once I started my car, a creepy vibe washed over me. I even mentioned it to my coworkers, who agreed it was odd, except for my boss, who thought I was just trying to gain sympathy for having to work the night shift. A week later, I had to deliver to him again. I arrived at the house around 10:30 p.m., and from the road, I noticed no lights were on. As I approached the door with the pizza box, it swung open to reveal the man, this time wearing a suit. I jumped back. "Sorry if I scared you," he laughed. I saw you out the window and figured I'd just open the door now so you wouldn't have to knock. I was getting scared because the darkness of the house felt strange. Do you like my suit? He asked. Yeah, it's nice, I replied nervously. Would you like to go on a date with me tonight? What the hell? I told him again that I had a boyfriend. He chuckled, moving closer, and said, Honey, there's no way a girl your age is in a serious relationship. If you go on a date with me, I'll show you how a real man treats a girl. Before I knew it, he snatched the pizza box from me and tossed it aside, grabbing my arms tightly. Panic shot through me as I tried not to cry from fear. Please, I just want to go home, I pleaded. He stared at me with a sinister look and said, I don't care. Get inside now. We're going to have a good time. He started trying to pull me into the house, and I fought back with all my strength. After struggling, he released one of my arms to pull something from his pocket. I presumed it was a knife. In that moment of desperation, I punched him hard in the stomach. It stunned him just long enough for me to break free. I ran to my car, but he chased me, grabbing for the door while brandishing a knife. Why are you making this so difficult? He yelled. In a panic, I grabbed a half-empty soda bottle from my cup holder and threw it at him, hitting his head. He let go, and I slammed the door shut just as he jumped onto the hood of my car, scratching and banging on my windshield with the knife. I put the car in reverse and sped away, desperately trying to escape. As I turned onto another street, he fell off the hood, and I slammed the gas as hard as I could, eager to put distance between us. After a few blocks, I finally reached a red light. Frozen, I sat there shaking and crying, realizing how close I had come to losing my life. Once the light turned green, I pulled over to the side of the road, still trembling. Eventually, I found the strength to drive back to the pizzeria. As soon as I walked in, my coworker noticed something was wrong. I broke down in front of him, and soon everyone gathered around, wondering what had happened. I recounted everything as calmly as I could, and my coworker comforted me. My boss, surprisingly, apologized profusely for what had happened and took me into the office to call the police. They arrived quickly, and I gave them my statement, along with photos of the scratches on my car as evidence. One of my coworkers followed me home that night. I collapsed into bed, exhausted, and somehow managed to fall asleep. I quit my job the next day, and a friend helped me find a new one at her clothing store. 2 days later, I received an update from the police. The duplex was owned by the guy's brother, who lived on the right side with his wife, while the man I encountered lived on the left. I learned that he had a history of robberies, assaults, and sex crimes, and had been released from jail about 5 months prior for having sex with a minor. When the police arrived at the duplex, he was long gone, and his family had no idea where he had run off to. But they assured me they would find him, and they did, though not alive. For 2 months, I lived in fear, worrying he would find me and finish what he had started. But then I got another call from the police. Apparently, he had fled to a nearby city and attempted to kidnap a teenager walking alone at night. Someone saw him and called the cops, leading to a chase. He blew a red light near a busy intersection and crashed into a van. By some miracle, the van's driver only sustained minor injuries, while he succumbed to his wounds before the ambulance arrived. I thanked the officers for everything and walked out of the station, As I walked down the street, I lit a cigarette and processed everything I had just learned. I don't usually wish death on anyone, but I felt relieved he could hurt no one else. I was just thankful I would never have to encounter him again, and that I wouldn't have to relive what happened that night in a courtroom. Who knows where I'd be if he had managed to pull me into his house. When I was 21, new to the police force, and freshly out of a relationship, a friend suggested I try Tinder. Feeling a bit invincible, as young cops sometimes do, I matched with an incredibly attractive woman, and we set up a date to watch the stars at a field she knew. I picked her up, and she guided us to a secluded area surrounded by woods. Not long after we settled in, a van approached, its dim headlights getting closer until it almost blocked us. I grabbed my flashlight and approached the driver, a polite man claiming he was the property owner, just checking to make sure we weren't hunting or anything. Satisfied with my explanation, he wished us well and left. I noticed my date kept texting, but didn't think much of it. An hour later, the same van sped toward us, stopping just short of my car. My date jumped out, running straight to the man. My stomach dropped. I demanded they back up and get on the ground, but instead, the man rushed at me, knocking me down. I managed to get up, but then I saw my date grab a metal pipe from the van. She told me they had a gun and wanted my money and my truck. Refusing to comply, I told them I was a cop, drew my concealed firearm, and ordered them on the ground. After a moment of shock, they surrendered, but when I called dispatch for backup, both of them bolted. I chased the man briefly into the woods before I saw a flash and heard gunshots. The invincible mindset vanished. I raced back to my car and got out of there. I returned to where I'd picked her up and waited for officers, including my sergeant and field training officer, to arrive. They didn't hold back, calling me a stupid rookie for my actions, but they were ready to handle the situation. When we went back to the field, the van was still there, and we found meth on the center console. My sergeant and training officer looked grim as they led me to the back of the van. Inside, we found duct tape, knives, handcuffs, rifle ammo, and something that appeared to be dried blood. We also found an AR-15 and 2 handguns. The license plates were stolen, and while the blood wasn't real, the setup was terrifying. Since that night, I've sworn off online dating completely. I had just come out of a pretty serious relationship of nearly 4 years, with talk of engagement and moving in together. When it ended, I took a good amount of time to rebuild myself and get back on my feet. My friends started encouraging me to get back out there, even though I wasn't looking for anything serious yet. I wasn't really interested, but they insisted I at least go on a few casual dates to get back into it, more for practice, as they put it. They were honestly just concerned since I'd become pretty reclusive. So I matched with this girl home from college for the summer. She seemed really interested and was even willing to drive to my area to meet up. I wasn't that interested, but my friends encouraged it, so I figured a casual date wouldn't hurt. I made it really clear that I wasn't looking for anything serious, and she said she was fine with that and still wanted to meet. So we planned a casual lunch at a sports bar. When I got there, she was already waiting, but she looked noticeably different from her pictures. They had to be at least 5 years old. I could tell based on tattoos she had in person versus what was in her photos. Not to sound shallow, but it threw me off a bit. I wasn't attracted to her, but figured it was still worth it to just hang out and have a new experience. She seemed incredibly shy and awkward, even shaking when she reached for her glass, which I actually found endearing. So I did my best to put her at ease, asking questions and making conversation about things you typically discuss on a first date, like where she grew up, her favorite music, and her college life. But all I got were one-word answers. This went on for about an hour, and despite her anxiety, I tried to keep things light. Then she suddenly pulls out a book and says, "I got this for you." I thanked her and asked about it, thinking it was maybe a favorite of hers. But she looks at me like I'm joking and says, "This is your favorite book. You told me it was." I'd never seen the book in my life, so we laughed about it and concluded she'd confused me with someone else. It was a bit embarrassing for her, but I made light of it, chalking it up to Tinder culture. By this point, I gently hinted that I needed to head home to take care of my pets, but she was really persistent about spending more time together and suggested we go for a walk in a nearby park. Trying to be polite, I agreed, and that's where things got weird. We sat on a park bench in broad daylight, with kids playing basketball nearby and people jogging past. I tried to make more conversation, still mostly getting one-word answers. Then, out of nowhere, she leaned in and started kissing me aggressively with no warning. It was so sudden that I just froze, not sure how to respond. Here was this shy, visibly nervous woman who'd barely spoken all date suddenly kissing me like her life depended on it. I was so confused and honestly pretty anxious, hoping she'd realize from my body language that I wasn't into it. While this was happening, some creepy guy walks by, gawking and catcalling, even suggesting a three-way, which made the situation even more bizarre. I managed to tell him no several times, while she just laughed, and I was seriously wondering, who even are these people? After he finally left, I insisted I needed to go home, but she got close to my face again and started asking if I thought she was sexy and if I wanted her. Feeling super uncomfortable, I said I really had to leave. She then tried to come back to my place, which I had to decline multiple times before she finally got the hint. Once I got home, I was pretty shaken up. I hadn't done the dating thing in a long time, and this experience felt so far from normal. Later, she texted, asking for a second date. Trying to be kind, I said I thought she was cool and that I'd had a nice time, but I didn't feel a connection, and reminded her I wasn't looking for anything serious. She then bombarded me with texts saying she didn't understand, thought I'd really liked her, and couldn't believe I wasn't interested. I didn't respond, figuring the texts would stop eventually. It was just a first date after all. They didn't stop. From the texts, you'd think we just ended a 2-year relationship. Then she began calling, and I finally had to block her. In school, there was a girl named Amy who didn't have many friends. She was quiet, a bit unusual, but also seemed like she could use a friend. As we got to know each other, I found her to be really nice, and we quickly became best friends. I was at her house every weekend, and we walked to school together. Even then, I felt something odd about her dad, Kevin. He always seemed a little too interested in me, constantly trying to play fight or putting his arm around me to apologize after jokingly taking my food. No matter where Amy and I were, he always seemed to be around, lurking. Once, I was over when Amy's grandmother was visiting. Kevin greeted her with an overly intense, sloppy kiss on the mouth. Everyone else, including Amy's family, laughed, but Amy and I were horrified. I thought about not going back, but I felt compelled to support Amy. One day, we were playing in her room, and Kevin stormed in, starting an argument over nothing. Furious, he grabbed trash bags, threatening to throw away all her toys. Amy was hysterical, but she tried to laugh it off, perhaps to ease the tension. She pushed me toward the door as if to say we should run, but I could tell she was serious. I stood outside, shaken, hearing Amy scream, yet I was too scared to leave her. Eventually, I went back upstairs, where Amy sat brushing her doll's hair, her tear-streaked face forcing a smile. I didn't tell my mom about Kevin, but after that, I only went over when I knew he wouldn't be there. Amy later shared with me that she had seen things no child should ever have to. Her mental health assessment revealed abuse that she endured regularly, even catching Kevin hurting her older sister. I realized my gut instincts about him were all too real, and I wished I had told someone sooner. After a long relationship ended, I took time to heal before friends encouraged me to get back out there. Reluctantly, I went on a date with someone I met on Tinder. She seemed interested, but looked very different from her pictures. Older, with visible signs of nervousness, even shaking when she reached for her glass. I tried to be kind and keep the conversation going, but I got one-word answers the whole time. She even pulled out a book, claiming it was my favorite, which clearly she had confused with someone else. I laughed it off, but the date continued awkwardly. She insisted on spending more time together, so I reluctantly agreed to a walk in the park. Out of nowhere, she lunged in to kiss me aggressively. I was frozen, completely taken aback, and tried to pull away subtly. Then a stranger approached, making inappropriate comments, and she laughed it off like nothing happened. I made an excuse to leave, but she tried to come back to my place with me, despite me saying no multiple times. Once I got home, she texted, asking for a second date, which I politely declined. But she didn't take it well, bombarding me with messages and calls until I had to block her. Later that summer, I began seeing someone from high school named Johnny. He was charming and well-respected, and we shared a lot in common. Despite his pressure, I was firm about waiting to be intimate, and he seemed to accept that. One evening, I drove up to visit him, and we had a fun day together. But that night, after he brought up condoms again, and I said no, his entire demeanor changed. His smile vanished, replaced by an unsettling coldness. Standing across from me, fists clenched, he told me I made him sick, and began graphically describing the violence he wanted to inflict on me, all while staring with hollow, unblinking eyes. For a moment, I thought he had to be joking, but as he kept talking, I realized he meant every word, and I felt trapped. I forced myself to stay calm, fabricating an excuse that my dad expected me home. Surprisingly, he relaxed, muttering, "I was just kidding." I grabbed my things, walked out, and kept calm until I reached my car. Only then did I break down, driving 4 hours home, shaken to my core. It It took years before I shared what happened that night with my mom. Looking back, I still feel lucky that I got away, but wish I hadn't dismissed the red flags along the way.